Chaz, Portland now has CLAT, Chinook Land Autonomous Territory.
CLAT?
As Antifa has set up walls and barriers outside the federal courthouse to claim their own autonomous zone. It seems to be a little more violent from the start than Chaz was, but at least we got the best guy to report on it.
Yep, Andy Noza, American conservative social media activist, journalist, best known for covering the violent street protests in Portland. He is the editor-at-large of the Post-Millennial, a Canadian conservative news website. He has been assaulted many times, beaten for merely trying to report the truth, and joins us now. Andy, how are you, sir?
I'm doing okay. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, it's our pleasure. It's been too long since we've talked. Hope you're doing well. Hey, tell us about, because there's no national news coverage of the insanity in Portland. What is happening night after night right now?
We've had 47 straight days of violent protests. You heard that right, 47. That's over 6.5 weeks. So while the George Floyd riots in the rest of the country have mostly ebbed and gone away, in Portland, they've continued strong because our political leadership here is weak. They've tied the hands of law enforcement to the point of where the federal administration had to send in the U.S. Marshals, various federal enforcement agencies to get a hold of what was happening outside one of the areas that was being attacked, which is the federal courthouse. Just last night, actually, several hours ago, they were still rioting in the streets. They created a so-called autonomous zone modeled off the so-called Chaz in Seattle.
Well, so from what we understand, it's not even being, the national media is not talking about this. It's not even getting that much coverage on the evening news in Portland. What gives?
Well, for your listeners on the West Coast, you know that national media has a bias against what's happening out here. We're on the other side of the country, and they don't really seem to care, unfortunately. But what happens in Portland doesn't stay in Portland, and that's what I've been saying for several years, actually, because while this country, other cities have been dealing with riots starting at the end of May, Portland had been dealing with it since 2016, after Donald Trump was elected. So I think the country is getting a taste of what's to come, particularly if you don't put a clamp on this violent extremist movement called Antifa.
So you've got the Antifa rioters doing what they've been doing now for 6 weeks, as you said, but what is the NLG Green Hat Volunteers you keep tweeting about? What's that organization?
The National Lawyers Guild is a lawyers organization. It goes decades back. It's old. It's historically very close to American communists. It's far left, I would say, radical left. The organization openly expresses support for political violence. They have a lot of donors and money, so they engage in lawfare to, in my opinion, undermine the republic. They sue police departments to weaken them. Their lawyers advocate for abolishing police, abolishing prisons. So they're using our American legal system to try to undermine it from within. And at every single one of these riots of Antifa on the far left, they send in their volunteers. They call them neutral observers, but they're not. You'll see them in the green hats, and a lot of these people actually they're not even lawyers. It might be students or just those who are supportive of the cause. And they record footage that is selective that can be used potentially in a court case against police. Of course, they will never use it against their fellow comrades, so they're not neutral.
Well, and it's worth mentioning for folks who haven't watched any of the videos you've been posting to Twitter that there is a hell of a lot of violence. People being beaten down, sucker punched, pulled out of their cars, and that sort of thing. It's pretty nightmarish.
It is, and it's literally a lawless zone in this area of downtown every night, and it spreads to other areas as well. Just a couple of weeks ago, we had somebody in a car fire 6 rounds out of a handgun just straight into the air. Police stay away. They're ordered away by by the mayor, excuse me. The mayor has been on record to say that he's very proud of getting the police to de-escalate and not engage in conflict, and he's actually blaming DHS, blaming Donald Trump for sending in federal officers to, because the federal officers have been actually effective in using tear gas and other crowd control tactics to stop the rioters as they have been trying to burn down the federal courthouse.
Yeah, so I wonder if that's a strategy. It seems like a bad strategy because since you've got the Portland powerful on your side, or at least willing to overlook you,
afraid of you,
Antifa. If you start going after a federal courthouse, that gives the feds the opportunity to come in, gives them an excuse. But so I'm watching the videos that you posted, just hours ago of this new CLAT, the Chinook Land Autonomous Territory, and they built walls with stolen stuff and spray painted and all this sort of stuff. Is that still up as we speak? And how big is it?
No, actually. So the federal police, bless them, actually used tear gas and flashbangs to clear the rioters from the street. So they established this so-called autonomous zone right in the middle of the main downtown street, as they've done actually many times. And in some ways, it's kind of worse than the Chaz, because Chaz became defined territory that to stay away from, whereas these people, they would be cleared, and then they set it up again the next day, and the next day, and the next day. So it's become a game. It's embarrassing for the city of Portland, and it's shocking that the people on city council are actually expressing support for these violent extremists.
And I want to make it absolutely clear to folks listening who may not be hip to this, that these are not civil rights protesters. These are Marxists and anarchists who are bent on actually a revolution. Not like writing groovy rock and roll songs about we got to have a revolution. No, they actually want to tear down the United States.
Yes, that cannot be overstated. I think they've been able to fool a lot of people by using terms like we're anti-fascist, we're anti-racist, we're for racial justice. And that's actually meant to fool the left, fool liberals, fool foolish media, and to push out their propaganda. The number one thing that they're best at is propaganda.
Andy, we barely have a minute left, but you're suing. Is it the city? Tell us a little bit about your lawsuit.
We're suing people who assaulted me last year in relation to 2 incidents that happened in May and June. And an update that I have on that actually is just by coincidence, one of the defendants named in the lawsuit was arrested this week at one of the riots in downtown by the federal police. So we've had trouble tracking him down, but now that he's in custody, facing a hearing, we can get him served. So this is very good news.
Excellent. That is good news. Andy Ngo is a courageous journalist. He has been one of the few documenting the insanity and violence of the Marxists and anarchists in Portland, Oregon. Andy, good to talk to you. Thanks for lending us a few minutes.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
All right, yeah, keep up the good work.
It's hard to wrap your head around what's going on here. You watch these videos on his Twitter feed and you think, how is this happening? And it's not on the news anywhere.
Yeah.
And some of these tweets are retweets from the Portland police as they video, hey, look at this giant riot that happened last night in a major city in America. Anybody see this? Hammers, rocks, bricks thrown at the cops. Huge fight. No, not making the news.
Mayor's telling us to leave them alone. Let them riot. Let them pull people out of their cars and beat them down.
It's wild.
It's stunning. It really is. I'm sure there are people listening right now who think these guys can't be serious. No. Is this really happening? Folks, it's really happening.
Yeah, check out some of the Twitter feeds.